Hey guys, this is John. It's been a long time since a new survival horror game hit, and even longer since Shinji Mikami has put one out. Finally, his new studio, Tango Gameworks, brings us back to the genre that made him famous just in time for Halloween, thanks to Bethesda, the publisher of the Elder Scrolls series, and Doom with The Evil Within. The Evil Within follows a story of Sebastian Castellanos, a detective called in to investigate a vicious collection of murders at a local mental hospital. After witnessing the death of his fellow colleagues, Castellanos is then sent tumbling through a twisted and only somewhat coherent story involving supernatural apparitions, gruesome monsters, and other things of nightmares. Unfortunately, despite all the cool imagery, the story flat out sucks. The overarching plot is confusing and hard to follow, using stilted techniques like jumping in and out of tormented visions that only Castellanos can see to further along the plot. While it's pretty cool the first time, it gets old fast. Instead of standing out, it becomes more of a routine thing that loses its edge. Sebastian Castellanos as a character doesn't quite work either. I can't help it but feel like Bethesda just copy and pasted your typical cop with a dark past character stereotype into their game. He is your typical jaded horror game protagonist who doesn't seem to be that fazed at all by the insane things happening around him. Simply put, Castellanos is an uninteresting protagonist, and I hardly felt anything for the character as I was playing the game, which is disappointing. The game tries its best to slowly give us the character's background piece by piece, but it ends up making it even more confusing instead of making us feel more invested. While it doesn't lack impact, the game's story drops the ball because of the lack of context and characterization. However, The Evil Within does an amazing job with its presentation, delivering the players a truly terrifying experience. The game's usage of lighting combined with the frightening audio completely engulfs the player in a horrifying atmosphere. The only issue I have with the presentation is that throughout the entire game there is a letterbox effect one would normally see in old horror movies. While the idea was cool at first, I found myself hating it more as time went on because it broke the immersion. Despite this, merely traversing around the environments was enough to make my heart skip a few beats, and that's before running into the grotesque creatures that inhabit the world. The Evil Within is full of monsters who relish at the opportunity to rend you limb from limb. These creatures can range from vaguely human monsters that populate each chapter, wielding hatchets and hurling sticks of dynamite, to more increasingly nasty and challenging foes that only a true sick person could think of. No matter where you are in the game's lengthy story, death is never far around the corner. The Evil Within is a brutal experience where the slightest lapse in concentration can turn you into a pool of organs lying on the ground. As a result, caution and quick thinking will be your greatest allies throughout the fight for survival. Ammo and resources are limited in the game, so even handgun rounds feel precious and every healing syringe feels like it could be your last. But while the game is stingy with its resources, it is rich in choices, giving the players numerous options to take in every encounter. Do you use that one remaining bullet for a headshot, or shoot your foe in the leg before rushing up and burning the creature with a match? Do you throw a bottle to lure that creature towards a trap, or risk dismantling the trap yourself and using those parts to craft resources? The whole game is littered with these tense moment-to-moment decisions, always forcing you to be creative and resourceful with the way you approach each fight. But when your craftiness pays off and you manage to scrape through an encounter, that feeling at the end is immensely satisfying. The Evil Within does a remarkable job of pushing you to your limit, but there are moments when it crosses the line and the experience suffers for it. I felt the learning curve in the game was very steep. In one level, you'll be taking out enemies left to right, but on the next, monsters would murder you without any explanation. A similar issue plagues some of the boss battles as well. The bosses are suitably terrifying, twisted monsters capable of making you shiver at the mere sight of them, while most of them make for great encounters that force you to use the wits and creativity you've been refining in basic combat. Other encounters require you to perform very specific secondary goals hidden somewhere in the environment. It's these fights that you need to plow through over and over until you figure out the right process that are a chore made even more tedious by the game's constant long load times and a consistent repeating of the same boss introduction cinematics. It also doesn't help the fact that I sometimes felt like the controls for the game were a bit too clunky for the encounters the player will be experiencing. I would find myself running for dear life when all of a sudden my character would just get stuck on a pebble, all because I didn't move the joystick correctly. Seeing as the story was severely lacking and way too hard to follow, with non-existent character development, the game earns a 5 out of 10 in story and a 3 out of 10 in character. Even though the letterbox effect was a little irritating, the overall nightmarish atmosphere of the game earns it a 9 out of 10 in presentation. The gameplay was fun, but the clunky controls often got in the way, and the difficulty curve was not consistent at all late in the game, earning it a 7 out of 10 on gameplay. With an amazing soundtrack and increasingly disturbing monster system, this game definitely earns a scare factor "Where's My Mommy?" 8 out of 10. Having said all of this, overall I would give this game a score of 6.6 out of 10. I know the score is a bit low, but I would still highly recommend The Evil Within for anyone looking for a true horror game experience. This is John, and I'll catch you guys later.